Sometimes topical stamp collections are just for fun. We collect possibly domestic cats or a certain type of bird or uh, railroad cars or something like this. But sometimes the subjects can get a little serious. In the past, I've done videos on a collection of accident prevention and safety, the history of the North Atlantic slave trade, and recently, in October, there was World Mental Health Month. And with the recent passing of the former First Lady Rosalind Carter, who worked tirelessly for trying to improve mental health access and understanding of mental health and the removal of stigma, I thought for this episode I'd take a look at mental health on stamps. When searching for stamps and other postal materials on the topic of mental health, they generally fall into a few categories. One of the first ones that I encountered was stamps that either commemorate a mental health day that might be celebrated or noticed annually. We'll take a look at a few of those. Also, some of the stamps commemorate a international congress or an international convention of psychiatrists and psychologists meeting to discuss the latest trends in mental health. So let's take a look at a few of those first. The first set of stamps are 3 stamps from Canada, and these are semi-postals. And I just like the graphics on these. These are to help inform people more about mental health and try and erase the stigma associated with mental health issues, and to raise money for groups and organizations that try and contribute to the progress in mental health care in Canada. This first one, I like the graphic on this one a lot. It's almost like a sunshine is shining down through the top of the head of a person into the brain and kind of bringing light to the brain and clarifying or lifting the thoughts that sometimes can be very dark and disturbing if someone is dealing with an illness that is part of the mental health variety of illnesses that people have to deal with. So this one I really like. I think the graphic is very important and extremely well done. There's another one also from Canada, another semi-postal, that I like as well, and this one shows puzzle pieces and kind of surrounding a person's head. And sometimes with mental health issues, things like depression and stuff, we really don't understand the causes or the most effective treatment, and that can be a very individual thing. And here I think these puzzle pieces represent the puzzle that mental health is. I mean, how do we treat this? What are the real causes? It can seem to be a mystery even to the experts. And these puzzle pieces, I think, represent the idea that it is something that we still have a lot to learn about, and treatment has changed drastically over the many, many years. And it can be a puzzle, but we have to solve it, and hopefully we can in the future. The next one also, the third of the semi-postals from Canada, is another one. It's just showing a person with a megaphone. And to me, this represents just someone shouting for help or just trying to make the voices heard. Too often in mental health issues, there is a stigma where people don't want to talk about it, where if someone was dealing with something like diabetes or heart disease or cancer, I mean, family and friends would be there to talk about it and discuss it, and even coworkers or something might understand why a person was in the hospital for a heart disease or something. But with mental illness, there's such a stigma, and people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear about it. And sometimes a person suffering just wants to shout to the world that this is just an illness. It's a medical condition, and I want to be heard. I need to be able to talk about this and discuss it. So these stamps, I think, are heavily depict graphics that explain or kind of contribute to the situation of someone with mental illness, and I like these 3 stamps especially. Also, in looking for stamps on this particular topic, you'll find stamps that depict people. A lot of them are doctors, either psychiatrists, some may be psychologists, or people that have made an effort to have a certain impact in the field of mental health. The first one here is a United States stamp, part of the Famous American series, and this is the woman Lillian Gilbreth. And Lillian Gilbreth, and this stamp is from 1987, and she was primarily an industrial psychologist, which is a little bit different off some of the ideas of mental health care if we think about mental health illnesses. But industrial psychology is another field that's included in this category. And she worked a lot with efficiency and how to make workplaces more efficient, and designed a lot of different things, even for the home, to try and make the human factors ideas a little bit more popular and more mainstream. So you will find people like this in the categories, or if you find checklists of mental health stamps, and there's quite a few of these, and Lillian Gilbreth was one from the United States here. This next stamp is one from Belgium and depicts a gentleman whose name I can't really pronounce correctly, probably, but it's Ovid de Crowley. Probably butchered that name. Sorry about that. But he lived from 1871 to 1932, and he was a psychiatrist and a medical professional, but his specialty was the education of children. So he was instrumental in the very early days of setting up schools and programs of education curriculum design for children to hopefully have them feel better about themselves and have a happier childhood, etc., etc. So these people, such as this gentleman here, you'll find a lot of similar stamps from people that worked in different fields of psychology. It's not just the mental health care for adults, but sometimes like this gentleman that worked his entire life with children. Next is a pair of stamps from the Netherlands, and these I find fairly interesting as far as the people who were involved in very early mental health care. And the one on the left, the gentleman's name there is Johannes Schrader van der Kolk, and he was a physiologist mainly, and he was one of the first people that were doing research into the causes of mental illness, and he also studied the causes of epilepsy. And he was the gentleman that thought that mental illness was something that could be treated, that it was an illness like any other illness in the body. And this is something that was very unusual for the time period, in the 1700s and early 1800s. Mental illness was often horribly attributed to things like, witchcraft or possession and stuff like this. And this physiologist was kind of ahead of his time here, and had a fight against a lot of discrimination of his ideas, but more and more doctors soon caught on to the idea that the various mental illness conditions were diseases and that they actually could be treated. The gentleman on the right is Johannes Weyer, and he was interesting because he was one that wrote a lot again about psychology and physiology, and he wrote a lot during the period of the witchcraft trials in Europe, and he was the first one to really write about and talk about the fact that, burning people at the stake for supposed witchcraft was just something that was horrible and was kind of nonsense. That, the people, often women, who were accused of such things, they might have been suffering from, anxiety disorder or depression, or perhaps just prejudice by the people of the various villages. And his texts and his papers that he wrote really decried the fact that there was anything supernatural about this, and that these people, that with some counseling or some better understanding and listening to them and finding out what may have been different about them, really made them innocent of any kind of silly, ridiculous charges of witchcraft or possession or things like this. It's an interesting pair of stamps here from the Netherlands. Also, with the topic of mental health, you'll find stamps that commemorate things like world meetings, world symposiums on the subject of mental health. And I'll show a couple of stamps here. There's the first one is one that I really like. I just like the graphics a lot on this particular stamp. I think it's beautiful. It celebrates or commemorates the World Congress of Psychiatry. This is a stamp from Japan. And it's got a fairy-like creature surrounded by flowers and seems to be looking up toward a butterfly. And I think this just represents the sort of a symbol of freedom or relief from the darkness of mental illness, and hopefully that the study of psychiatry can help improve treatment and make lives better for people that deal with this type of illness. The next stamp is also similar. It commemorates a symposium of psychologists and psychiatrists, and this was from Macau. And this one is interesting. The stamp isn't a very good copy, unfortunately, but it was the only one I could find. But one of the main topics at this symposium was the use of meditation and mindfulness meditation, specifically in the treatment of things like depression and anxiety. And I know from my own experience that this is very, very effective, and meditation is a big part of a lot of more modern treatment here. So you can also find stamps that commemorate these various meetings of psychiatrists and psychologists and mental health professionals around the world. And some of these stamps can be pretty interesting, and they're pretty easy to find, and none of this material is expensive by any means. Now, besides stamps, you could also, of course, find postcards that relate to this topic of mental health. And one of the interests of mine is postcards that depict some of the older asylums that were in existence around the country, especially in the United States. And here's one example of a postcard that depicts an asylum in Wisconsin. And this is the Shawano Insane Asylum, as they were termed back then. And if you notice this photograph, this is a very large and elaborate building. And many of the asylums that were around in the 1800s into the early 1900s were these very large buildings that could house hundreds of patients, and they were very elaborate, sometimes had very large grounds surrounding the building. Often the patients or the people housed in these asylums even would work gardens and raise crops and stuff that would feed the patients and staff that worked at these large asylums. And kind of sadly, the treatments weren't always ideal in these early facilities. People were usually committed by their families or sometimes through legal means to live often many, many years in these types of asylums, and sometimes for the rest of their lives. And treatment was less than ideal, to say the least. Sometimes we would consider it horrific by modern treatment standards, but the experts, doctors at the time, really didn't understand or know any better. And these asylums often ran out of money to keep going as they got into the mid 1900s, or even a little bit earlier, and started to fade away. But the construction of the buildings themselves and the photographs of these early buildings, I think, are an important part of a collection or a study on this subject of mental health care. And you can find quite a few of these postcards from around the United States and even from other countries. And I think it's an interesting story. There are a lot of books available about these early asylums and how they were run and things like this. And it has a personal aspect to me. I mean, I had a maternal grandfather who, after he got back from World War I, was actually committed to a similar facility in Wisconsin and spent most of his life until he was in his 60s confined to this type of facility for what we would now understand to be nothing more than PTSD, and could be treated in an entirely different manner, and a person would not have to be confined for many, many years. So if you're interested in this topic, I mean, kind of look at postcards and search around at postcard shows or online at some of the postcard dealers, and you can find a lot of graphics about these, or a lot of photos of these facilities as they existed in their prime. Finally, there's 3 stamps and some 3 souvenir cards from the United Nations, and these were issued this year. These are new to commemorate, as the UN does every year, World Mental Health Day, which was in October this year. And they issue 3 stamps for the 3 United Nations offices, New York, Geneva, and Vienna. And they also issued 3 souvenir cards. And the theme of this from the United Nations this year was that mental health care is a basic human right, and that according to the UN studies that they've done, that around the world 1 in 8 people suffer from some sort of a mental illness at some point during their life, and access to health care and elimination of the stigma surrounding this type of illness is critical and something that really needs to be worked on. So the 3 stamps here are shown from the UN, and as always with the UN stamps, I think the designs are always beautiful and always very, very well done. And the souvenir cards I'll show next, I'll put up on the screen as well. And these are, again, from the 3 offices with the 3 different stamps. So there's 3 different souvenir cards. And I'll put a link in the description to where you can purchase things from the United Nations Postal Administration. And they do have a booklet here, this thing that comes out called Fascination, as you order things. And they'll talk about something like the new issues, like these World Mental Health Day issues. And they also have lists of other things that can be ordered from the UN Postal Administration. And some of the other nice things about this booklet, when you order things from them, they will have more information also, such as the postmarks on the souvenir cards and how they are designed and what they look like for the 3 United Nations offices. So every year the UN does commemorate World Mental Health Day, and they have programs within the UN that around the world tries to help people get better access to mental health care, and to explain that this is an illness, and to try and remove some of the stigma surrounding this. So kind of a complex topic. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of different ways you could go with this topic. If you were to collect this, you could concentrate on, as I showed a few stamps, the people involved, the psychiatrists and psychologists. There are checklists available from the ATA for that type of thing. Also look for stamps that commemorate the various symposiums or international meetings on the subject. And postcards, I showed just the 1 postcard of the asylum in Wisconsin, but there are many more available as well. And then, of course, search, internationally, because there's a lot of countries that have issued stamps that are very important for this type of topic and are very well done and are worth looking into. So sometimes our topics can be a little serious, and this is one that's important to me personally. And if you have any comments on this one, please leave it in the comments section of the video. And again, this is my name is Joseph, and this is the Eclectic Philatelist. And if you like this video, please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel, and thank you for watching. Have a great day.